Thank you so much for this extensive introduction. I'm very honored and also a bit like baffled. It's like, oh yeah, what am I going to talk about now again? So we'll see how that goes. Anyway, rethinking future heritage. What you see here is an image from Google Earth showing one of the atolls. Can you hear me good enough, actually? Because my voice is actually going up and down a little bit due to the flu last week, but I hope it'll be audible enough. Otherwise, just... Okay, excellent. I'll try. So this image is from Google Earth, showing one of the atolls that form the nation of Tuvalu in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, about midway between Hawaii and Australia. Tuvalu is composed of 3 reef islands and 6 atolls, of which the main atoll is where the capital Funafuti is, here on the far right corner. Its population, based on figures from 2017, is around 10,500. In the late 19th century, Great Britain claimed control over the islands, designating them as within their sphere of influence, and from 1916 to 1975, they were managed as part of the Gilbert and Ellice Island colonies. In 1978, Tuvalu became fully independent as a sovereign state within the Commonwealth. Finally, in 2000, Tuvalu became a member of the United Nations. So I won't go into detail at all about the country's legacy or history. More relevant for today is that Tuvalu has been fighting the consequences of climate change already since 2005. Because it's a low-lying island nation with average height above sea level is about 0 to 5 meters, as well as the battle against plastics that drift to their shores and the bleaching of the reefs, which they depend upon for food, housing, labor, and living. So with all these challenges in mind, Tuvalu made a call for urgent action on climate change. And its Minister for Justice, Communication and Foreign Affairs, Simon Coffey, delivered his online speech at the 2021 Climate Change Summit in Glasgow, the COP26, while standing in the ocean in Funafuti in Tuvalu. A year later, at the COP27, Simon Coffey was visible in a second video announcing how Tuvalu will be the first digital nation, saying, "As our land disappears, we have no choice but to become the world's first digital nation." As the camera slowly zooms out, we can see that Coffey is no longer standing on the island shorelines, but in a specific island, the smallest island of the volcanic archipelago that is now virtually reconstructed. Commissioning brand agency The Monkeys and production house Collider developed a pragmatic, a provocative perhaps, solution for a worst-case scenario. The launch by the Minister of the Virtual Islands successfully reached over 2.1 billion viewers and won the 2023 Cannes Lion Grand Prix for the video. Last year's video at COP28, this is in 2023, sorry, here we go, yeah, showed the dedication and the progress of the Tuvalu's minister and inhabitants of the archipelago to bring attention to their secured fate. Coffey here explains in this video how under current international law, if Tuvalu loses its land, it also loses its sovereignty. In other words, its continued existence as a nation state, including the protection of its maritime boundaries and other entitlements, is contingent on other nations agreeing to legally recognize Tuvalu's ongoing sovereignty, with or without land. So they decided to amend its constitution to reflect a new definition of statehood. The amendment pronounces that the state of Tuvalu, within its historical, cultural, and legal framework, shall remain in perpetuity in the future, notwithstanding the impacts of climate change or other causes resulting in loss of its physical territory. As a country without physical territory, now aims to stimulate its nationhood in the form of a digital twin. While interesting legal questions arise from this declaration, I'm particularly interested in how Tuvalu wants to secure their historical and cultural past. So according to Kofi, 3 aspects of Tuvalu's nationhood will be recreated in its digital twin: its territory, the recreation of the natural beauty of Tuvalu, which could be interacted with in different ways, its culture, the ability for Tuvaluan people to interact with one another in ways that preserve their shared language, norms, customs, wherever they may be, its sovereignty. If there were to be a loss of terrestrial land over which the government of Tuvalu has sovereignty, how then could they have sovereignty over virtual land instead? Its territory is now in the process of being traced, measured, calculated, and translated. Using LiDAR, the light detection and ranging system, in layman's terms, a remote sensing method using to examine the surface of the Earth, their focus has been on scanning the geography of the 124 islands. In the meantime, Simon Kofi is taking actions. And in his last video message, he is also asking, if you are about to lose anything, or better, everything, what is the one thing that you would save? The answers from the Tuvalu people range from artifacts of sentimental value, the sounds of the language spoken by their children, wisdom in their grandfather's stories, or the vibrant dances at our festivals. These will all be digitized and will become part of our digital arc. And as you can see, I'm quoting the video of Kofi's speech here. It's a vessel built for crisis, designed to carry the very soul of Tuvalu. Finally, Simon Kofi hopes to secure its sovereignty by upgrading its national communications infrastructure with the installation of 2 submarine cables, ensuring sufficient bandwidth for the transition to the cloud. The first experiments are happening by exploring a digital ID system, which will be used to connect to the blockchain and connect also the Tuvaluan diaspora and allow them to participate in Tuvaluan life, wherever they may be. So 3D scanning and printing are among the main vehicles to restore cultural heritage by generating detailed copies of an artifact, a building, or even a site. In terms of accessibility and preservation, there are undeniable benefits. But in what ways do these techniques also affect cultural heritage politics? It's become widely known that commercial businesses profit from selling copyrighted files or by providing restricted access. Subsequently, more and more large-scale heritage digitization projects are driven by economical motives that follow a techno-colonial mindset, a process by which institutions or corporations claim ownership of privatized data that is produced by their users. So what are we talking about here? A digital twin is basically a virtual replica of a physical entity, a virtual prototype of a physical asset to simulate, help analyze or make predictions about the things it scans or digitizes. The use of digitization techniques moved from the initial digitization of paper, photographs, and forgotten objects in museum collections to developing detailed 3D models from existing damaged or destroyed artifacts, statues, or even archaeological sites. While some museums and archives provide access to their collections and even to free downloadable 3D scans, given users sometimes restricted or unrestricted access to the objects, is very rare still. Often what is available are simplified models or merely a small selection of everything that is scanned. This highlights a dilemma of power. On the one hand, losing control over your objects is not something that most controllers are willing to risk. On the other hand, it needs to be acknowledged that high-quality 3D scanning is still a very expensive process that not everyone has access to. This is best visible, in a way, when looking at some of the major initiatives that in the last few years started to provide access to destroyed cultural heritage. And perhaps one of the best known is Google project Wonders of the World, which started in 2012. In continuation of Google Street View, in 2011, Google set up Google Art Project. In 2016, it renamed it in Google Arts and Culture. The project is dedicated to showing the interiors of art and heritage institutions, initially employing the same technology as used in the Google Street View car, with the development on 2016 of high specialized digitization techniques referred to as the Google Gigapixel Art Camera. People can now move through galleries or zoom in on specific paintings or objects. At very high resolution, the faintest paint strokes and the minutest cracks in the paint can be seen. Details that would be hard to discern in the museum itself. Preceding the success of Google Art Project in November 2009, Google made a public manifestation of their digitization project of the collection of the Iraq National Museum in Baghdad, owner of the finest Mesopotamian collections of the world. According to Google's chief executive, Eric Smith, the aim was, and I quote, to make the images and the ideas of Iraqi civilization available to all the people of the world. Although perhaps responding to the international indignation at the plundering and destruction of many objects in the museums a few years earlier, in particular in 2003, after Americans' invasion, Google's initiative nevertheless provoked controversy and debate around the world. Even though Google stated that they would bear all the digitization costs, such philanthropy often comes at a price. Google's endeavor to digitize the treasures of the world, as they call them, enables many to see things they otherwise never would. But it raises several questions. For example, what happens when people are referred to corporations instead of public institutions for such information and services? All corporations exist to make a profit. And in the case of Google, this is by providing third parties with access to web users and profiting from charging for that access. To attract users, Google needs content. Through content, it can create traffic, track users, and generate even more data. Data and database structures are what makes Google different from archives and museum collections. While museum and archives comprise a carefully built entity for preserving culture and memory, a database reacts to input and searches for information by making the most efficient connections. The more data there is, the better the connections and predictions can become, and the more profitable it will be. Many refer to this type of technology-enabled access as a new form of colonialism, a commercial, a digital, or techno-colonialism, which compares in a way to the stronghold over high-end techniques and preventing free control over the outcomes, with the motivations behind previous colonial collections where profits were made from privileged access to certain kinds of information through exploration, discovery, and collecting. In a sense, one could wonder, is Google the new UNESCO? And this seems actually less far-fetched, perhaps, than it is. Rather, however, than answering this question, I'd like to point you to two recent articles that made a close scrutiny of Google's history of the art and culture project and its various relations. Since a few years, several counter movements have started. For example, the one you see here, the non-governmental collaborative initiative, New Palmyra, which collects data from international partners and uses it to create a digital reconstruction of Palmyra. They present workshops about the process and share the models and data in the public domain. The project is not to be mistaken, though, for the reconstruction exhibition also of Palmyra's Arc de Triomphe. for instance, in Trafalgar Square in London for World Heritage Day in April 2016. This project gave little credence to the complex history and context of the artifact. Moreover, it reiterated and reinforced the colonial mindset, reasserted by Boris Johnson when he was mayor in London, in which Western societies portrayed as civilized and other societies, in this case Muslims, as barbarians. As many critics observed, the role of the West in the rise of ISIS, which led to the destruction of these statues, was ignored. In this sense, and as also concluded by archaeologist Noor Munawar, reconstruction can be as destructive as the destruction itself. Tuvalu decided not to collaborate with Google Arts and Culture. Instead, the government chose to own and operate its own website. With still half-functioning websites, the first digital nation could be seen as a provocation, or perhaps a call for attention. Rather than following many Western museums in their digitization frenzy, its aims may be more political. For instance, by addressing the COP meetings next to making a call for action toward this climate change. It may also raise the question, what happens to an independent country as a legal entity when it changes from a physical to a virtual base? This question also relates to Tuvalu's political history, which, as I mentioned before, only in 1978 became independent as a sovereign state. Yet, if it's insincere in its efforts to digitize its cultural heritage, it may soon face the effects of a different colonial exertion. While many institutions are trying to digitize their collection, those that allow the public unrestricted access to their digitization objects are rare, as I mentioned. Often what is available are simplified models or small selection of everything that is scanned. Hiring the help of corporations is often a necessity for those who cannot afford it in the first place. Following this capitalist mode of accumulation by dispossession, such practices come at the price in which collections are turned into tradable data that may have far-reaching consequences for the future of public cultural heritage. Here, the questions around the legal rights of a virtual state, or who could own and where to store the culture of a sovereign nation, may be just the tip of the iceberg. But what happens when considering Tuvalu's alternative approach, setting up a fictional entity to critique the effects of Western colonial thinking on environmental, legal, political, or technological levels? In other words, how to unlearn such colonial logics through counter practices or decolonial practices, practices that try to overcome or resist a colonial conditioning by favoring collaboration and freely sharing over individual or monetary gains. So in what follows, I will explore several artists' initiatives that try to counter these practices. Such examples challenge the conventional meaning of value, which is dictated by the market based on copyrights around authorship or ownership, and that adheres to the standardized metadata and categorization, which will foremost benefit data-driven economies. Instead, what is valued and becomes valuable is belonging to a wider community in which control over use is embedded in the network. Several of these projects, already the ones that I named New Palmyra, or artist projects like Oliver Laurik's Lincoln 3D scans and Nora Al-Badri and Jan Nicolai Nellis' hack of Nefertiti, have criticized the digitization efforts by institutions as being too exclusive and reiterating colonial tendencies. Instead, they are propagating advanced public reuse and sharing of technical tools. An alternative mode of critique has been voiced by the Iranian-American artist Morsin Aliari. In several projects, he proposes to reimagine the politics of contemporary digital heritage economies by emphasizing the value of refiguration and storytelling as methods. In her project, Material Speculations, ISIS 2015-2016, she uses 3D modeling and printing to reconstruct relics that ISIS destroyed in Iraq, both as a way to counter the Western reconstruction approach, which she refers to as digital colonialism, and the destruction itself. With the project, she discusses 3D scanning and printing techniques as ways to preserve cultural history and memory by focusing on the question how cultural memories are produced, configured, and to whom they belong, what power structures they embed, and what values they engender. The work was motivated by videos that ISIS released of the destruction or removal of many of the objects of the Mosul Museum in Iraq, as well as ancient statues and artifacts from the 2,000-year-old UNESCO World Heritage Site around Hatra and Nivaea, an ancient Assyrian city of Upper Mesopotamia. Thinking of a way to counter acts of destruction and extraction, she recreated 12 statues. Since much information, not in the least the statues and artifacts themselves, were lost, she based her reconstructions and discussions with archaeologists, historians, employees from Mosul Museum, and the sparse information in books and exhibition catalogues. In addition to also analyzing public documentation, so as tourist snapshots that she could find. As key components of the work, she put all her research on a flash drive, which now contains information about the object, including the ISIS self-published videos of the demolitions, the email exchanges, the images and text documents that she had found. Moreover, she placed the disk drive in the resin sculptures. She created thereby a sort of 3D time capsule. Since the 3D scans are provided, people can also print their own copy of the statue, enabling them also to reconstruct and construct their own version of the past, but only if they break the sculpture first. So addressing the tension in a way between opacity and transparency, inaccessibility and accessibility, the capsule disrupts the cycle of symbolic equity and selective digitization. It's only through partial loss alternative perspectives can emerge to imagine new futures. Her message is clear when reading also the file formats and the titles, And it says, with every title going up and down, ultimately the only way to stop the destruction of Iraq and Syria's cultural heritage is to stop the so-called war on terror and the military invasion of the Middle East, because everything is a cycle and nothing can truly be done without breaking this cycle. So rather than preservation, she regards her projects as a form of transformation or an act of refiguring, suggesting a continuation of the destroyed objects. The act of refiguring, which she describes as both reactivation and preservation, is an act of going back and retrieving the forgotten or destroyed histories, a process of archiving, creation, storytelling, performance lectures, and fabulation. This act can also be seen as a form of alternative documentation, as multi-layered storytelling, in which power structures are not rejected, but function as counter-narratives of the past to reimagine a different type of future. Speculating on the past and the future, Alayari becomes more beyond a merely metaphorical gesture by making the different models and research available for download. By allowing people to print their own copy and construct their version of the past, she proposes a new method for the reconstruction of history. However, she's also placing the method of reconstruction between quotation marks, and thus emphasizing that these are not real replacements, because she believes there is no honest way that one can replace these artifacts in the first place. Rather than preservation, though, she regards her projects as a form of transformation, suggesting a continuation of the destroyed objects in a different form. So providing a practical and political alternative archival method for endangered or destroyed artifacts, with her project Material Speculation, ISIS, Alayari tries to expose the hypocrisy inherent in the inconsistent reactions of the different parties involved in cultural heritage. It could be said that she participates and perpetuates the narrative of cultural heritage. But Alayari clearly resists the symbolic and economic value attached to the original or authentic object by open sourcing all her research and files. On the one hand, by creating a free and shared system, she challenges conventional Western methods of preserving history and by proposing 3D technology as a tool for resistance, as well as documentation. The project reflects the hope that technology will help fill the gaps caused by an ongoing construction. Moreover, by distributing the project in open source, it is also a critique on the proprietary infrastructure in which most of 3D printing is now controlled by Western tech companies, who own the copyrights on much of the world's cultural heritage. In an attempt to explore methods of decolonization, Alayari offers a counterexample in which inherent qualities of technology, such as easy distribution and sharing, are part of the work, rather than merely tools that are also empower the disempowered in the process. Whereas Google Cultural Institute and many other commercial 3D companies lack a defined or ethical position towards the material they use, Alayari shows the importance of the social life of these things. By documenting and presenting the social and cultural changes the objects have endured, she emphasizes how they acquire value and meaning. This process of value and evaluation is no longer fixed, but moves and changes with every new iterations, thus not only averting destruction, but also opposing imposed systems of description and classification. So rather than attempting to preserve cultural heritage, she provides forgotten or destroyed objects and their users with agencies to react in the world. In one of her more recent projects, called She Who Sees the Unknown, from 2016, Alayari activates several jinn figures taken from Middle Eastern folklore. These jinn figures can be both good and evil and have the power to influence the future from their sort of parallel world. Through the multiple iterations, the yins are positioned as symbols that can be questioned and addressed differently depending on the context. Rather than myths of the past, the jin's power and stories are attached to contemporary imbalances of power in which Alayari infuses also her own personal experience. For instance, here, in the top level, there are the drawings of the duo Jiaoyi and Mayuzhou, who exist across different religions and narratives from the Middle East. While various interpretations of the two exist, they generally are connected to causing trouble and creating chaos. Their sort of looming threat is detained by the building of a wall to control them. But as the prophecy goes, one day the wall will crumble and their release will precede the end of days. Alayari chose these figures because they also symbolize the start of the building of the wall on the US-Mexican border, the tumult around Brexit and the Muslim ban in the US all around 2017 and 2018. So the project, She Who Sees the Unknown, consists of different sculptures, videos, a VR installation, and also an online archive. The counteract, in a way, in this online archive happens between the restricted access. The deeper layer of the online portal are only accessible to those who can read Farsi or Arabic, and the record-keeping system. With the former, she highlights the struggle against legal and technical barriers to gain access to her own cultural history, critiquing also the alleged open access model that's now prevalent in many Western public institutions, where the standard language rarely reflects or appeals to the object's origin. Yet her approach to record keeping stays also quite close to conventional standards, such as the IZG International Standard for Archival Description, that defines the elements that should be included in archival finding aids. Favoring, though, the needs of specific communities and rejecting the notion of universal access to heritage, these are quite emblematic also of her decolonial quest. But the way how information is made accessible remains faithfully to Western international standards. While that is surprising, given her interest in decolonial technologies and their underlying systems, it could be seen as an act of reconciliation. As she mentioned, her projects are not about removing hierarchies or power structures, but rather shifting them towards previously marginalized perspectives. Hence, here again, refiguring is a more nuanced method of balancing between reappropriation and fabulation, and using existing mechanisms to distribute or create visibility on a large scale. Alayari shows the necessity of rethinking, repositioning, and questioning to understand who is responsible for cultural heritage, where is it done, and thus what archiving means epistemologically. Although the archive's ontological status remains unchanged, she challenges its value system by readdressing the debate between the original and its copy that is central in the dissertation discourse. However, rather than being interested in the perfect copy, in her engagement with ancient mythology and their ensuing stories, she builds on its process of storytelling instead of creating a faithful rendering of its object. The object, in this sense, becomes a node that is repeated, but its meaning and value, as well as its appearance, are informed by a changed context. So returning to the digital twin of Tuvalu. While around a dozen of nations recognize Tuvalu's digital sovereignty as a functioning state, a few years after its launch, there's little more to see than a continuous loading icon, trying to show image, text, and sound files, other 3D islands, and Excel sheets. It shares volleyball scores, recipes, images of fishes and birds, and those are at the moment perhaps only part of its back-end database. What was once announced as a precedent-setting long-term idea seems foremostly to confirm the research of how digital data doesn't have a long lifespan. Indeed, there are more questions than answers in this project. Looking into the objects that are shown in the last video reveals that most of the items that are listed are actually objects that are part of the National Museum of New Zealand in Te Papa. I also took a closer look at the digital twin and its production, particularly in relation to the efforts of this high-end company effectively called Place, and which is part of the American multinational and global market leader ESRI, the Environmental System Research Institute, ensuring the tech-heavy capture of the island. While their work on the project is pro bono, usually the cost, again, of such philanthropy is paid elsewhere. As I briefly mentioned in the beginning, they used LiDAR to scan the islands. However, and similar to most technical systems and devices, LiDAR will soon become obsolete. Due to a new technical collaboration, the so-called ASAS system, which connects a camera to a radar, and taking away the challenges that LiDAR was facing, particularly in adverse weather conditions. This new system is anticipated to enter serial production at the end of this year. And once installed, it will definitely replace the current LiDAR systems. So what does a digital twin actually do? Since a few years, it's been used as a replica, a simulator for all kinds of things. Think archaeology, military, medicine, infrastructure, building, and all kinds of other things. But the expected increase in digital twins is enormous, as you can see in this little graph that I found online. In these different fields, digital twins can be used as a method to obtain value from data and as platforms for AI and data science techniques, such as machine learning and statistical analysis. The aspiration for digital twins, particularly from commercial vendors, implies that they will somehow capture and contain the best of everything, meaning models, data, AI methods, processes, controls, decisions, etc., in an optimal way, well, at least for some. Simulation, prediction, optimization all require reliable services, high transaction speeds, high energy demands, and large quantities of water to keep everything cool. Returning to Tuvalu's goal to build a stronger technical network, installing 2 submarine cables that will ensure the necessary bandwidth for the digital transition to the cloud. I started tracing the names of the current members that were named in the video of these digital passports on the blockchain, which turned out to be closely related to our minister, Simon Kofe. While the younger man carries the last name of Kofi, one of the others too looks similar when looking at the minister's old website from 2021. Finally, Kofi's own ministry post after the elections last year has been renamed from Minister for Justice, Communication and Foreign Affairs into a Minister for Transport, Energy, Communication and Innovation, perhaps shifting the focus from justice and foreign affairs to energy and innovation. Following these signs, Kofi may speculate more towards the future than on the past, and in the process, potentially accelerating the environmental fate of the islands. In an attempt to give back control to communities whose heritage has been taken, artists show the importance and possibility of challenging the authority of political and technological colonialism over digitized cultural heritage. Here, cultural heritage is presented as an open-ended process, an alternative economy characterized by collaboration, sharing, and transformation. In such an environment, local knowledge is favored over standardized metadata and categorization, the multitude of copies over the original, and reuse over ownership. It supports a sense of belonging that is rooted in social exchanges, where value is placed on sustaining productive relations rather than on original objects. This dynamic model considers the network of ideas as a resource and as a method that is produced, shared, and distributed by giving credence to all involved. Such methods of exchange may reveal opposing versions of the past, but also entice thinking about new values and propose ways to reclaim cultural heritage. While this may include a loss, it may also dismantle the structures of technical and economical domination, as well as provide a more climate-friendly solution towards preserving cultural heritage. This process is not merely focused on sustaining what is made, but supports speculation and unrestricted remaking. So ambiguating perhaps the future of Tuvalu's digital twin, its minister may also be doing just that. Thank you very much.